Okay, let's see. I think that we have some people in. Just about to start the presentation soon. Okay, hello everyone. Apologies for being a bit late and the video quality. The reason is that with me live streaming, it means that I have to kind of work all the inputs and outputs sort of dynamically using this interface that I've got, which is not ideal. But yeah, I think we're sort of ready to go. I think we've got 2 people in, 2 viewers at the moment. So I'll start to run through the presentation. As you can see, I'm kind of flicking between things. And what I'll do is I'll occasionally check in on the chat. So I've kind of got it running on my phone as well, so I can keep an eye on the chat and see what questions arise. So without further ado, we'll sort of get kicked off, and hopefully we'll just have more people sort of join as the presentation progresses. But the sort of the main theme I want you guys to sort of be aware of is that you're able to stop me at any point for any questions that you've got. Otherwise, what I'll do is I'll just sort of read off the sort of material that I've got prepared and sort of walk you through the sort of ideas and material I want to present. I do apologise for me being a little bit unprepared. I am using a thing called Streamlabs Pro, and it's not the best tool, so I'm having to look at my phone and check the input to see if everything works. So I'm just going to check the audio works. Right, looks fine. Okay. So I'll just get started. Hopefully you'll be able to sort of see the presentation as I go, and you'll see me in the top right hand side of the screen. So who am I and why am I sort of doing this presentation? As some of you, hopefully most of you, have sort of seen on my LinkedIn and previous social media communications, one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to share with you guys the steps that I took to make it from essentially being somebody who worked in a factory. My very first job was a bricklayer. My second job was working in a meat factory, and so my salary was extremely low. And at the time, I didn't think I could have done well in my career, particularly that I came from a pretty poor family and dealt with sort of my own challenges. But at the moment, I am now the sort of working at Barclays in the role of the head of DevOps. I've been working in RBS, Lloyd's, Barclays, Aviva. I've worked around in China, India, USA, Europe. And I think I've sort of built my brand strong enough to sort of keep my profession sort of self-sustaining, and this is the sort of ideas that I want to share with you guys. I am going to keep an eye on the chat for any questions that you may have. Please send me a message if you can't hear or if the camera angle's not that great. Okay, so let's just get off with the first sort of bombshell, which is 4 years ago, I thought I could code. I couldn't code. I had very little experience, and it's easy to think that, especially if you're a lot of people that have expressed an interest in this video have been people that are university students, people that have maybe just begun their career or they're looking to change career, and they feel that in tech they maybe need 15, 20, 25 years experience, and I don't think that's the case. And so really sort of the main purpose of let me try and move this on. So the main purpose of this talk is to kind of first allay the fears that you don't need 15, 20 years of experience behind you in order to make the sort of career transition into tech, even to move into senior tech roles, depending on the path that you want to take, may actually be 5 years. It could be 5 years, could be 10 years. I do apologize. I'm constantly checking the phone to make sure that everything's streaming okay. So, please send me a message again if you don't hear me. So okay, let's kind of get started. The first thing is I've got a list of topics that I want to talk you through, and some of those topics include things such as like how to generate revenue, so how to make money if you're not working, how to build your brand, how to build your own technical expertise, and for those who are maybe not looking to be so technical but want to move into the realms of tech as a management position, architecture, leadership. I'll also cover that as well. So I'll cover both angles, right? So sort of hands-on, your hands-on entry, and the more sort of people focused and architecture focused roles. So there's a point I kind of want to get across here, right? Which is like 10 years ago, coding was very, very different. And 20 years ago, it was even more different. So I work with, in a previous role, I work with mainframe engineers who have their average age was about 50, 55, and coming up close to retirement. And when they were in the position that you are now, or that people are starting out now, if their code failed to compile 3 times, then they would be called in the back office. If their code failed to compile a 4th time, there's a possibility that they would be fired. Now, that seems hyperbole, but it's the truth, especially in large organizations. We kind of think of tech culture today as Google and Amazon, and being sort of very socially conscientious, so lots of reward packages, treat the employees well, but that wasn't always the case, because in the past the amount of people moving into tech was much smaller, and the requirements were extremely precise, and it was much more competitive in the sense that you couldn't just get into the field if you had 2 or 3 years experience. It is a different situation now, and hopefully I'm going to sort of talk you through that process. So I guess what I kind of wanted to get across there is that your ability to make it into an industry in tech is not as restricted as it would have been 10 or 20 years ago. In fact, depending on how hard you work, you do have the potential to build yourself a path within the first 3 years. And what I mean by that is you could make it into a tech industry within 6 months. However, you could make it into your ideal role at maybe the bottom rung within 3 years. Okay, so this is the sort of agenda. I'm going to keep an eye on the comments. These are the things that I'm going to walk through. So I've split it onto the left side. So if you look at the left side, we've got the professional skills. And I think this is more important because of the people that wanted to watch this video. A large proportion of them were more interested in the how do I get in, how do I apply for the role, do I need certification, what sort of things do I need, but that said, I am going to cover some of the tech the tech specifics as well, particularly around the things such as moving into DevOps, AI and AGILE. I'll also cover one which is really close to me, which I hope will be close to you as well. So for those watching this video who were like me and are not in a good job, or struggling to pay the bills, or even just feel that the sort of world's against you and there's sort of no way for you to make it out there into a role that you really want to do, I am going to show you some steps that I took. So that's on this part of escaping poverty. I'm going to show you some steps that I took, which you can take to build your brand, to get you in the community, to develop your skills, and to slowly put you on the path which can bring you into a sort of professional, you can think of it as like a professional roadmap to say a position in DevOps, project management, sort of data science, any sort of role like that. And I'll then sort of finish off with some sort of warnings and sort of milestones that you should be aware of. Again, I do apologise as you see me look to my phone, because my phone is just showing what you should be seeing. Okay, so again, this is just going to be really quick, but I just kind of want to make you realise that what I'm saying has gravitas, right? So I'm not just somebody off the street. So this shows that, I'm one of the top 100 contributors in GitHub in the world, definitely in the UK. So last year I had about 3,000 contributions, have about 165 repos. So for those who are not aware of GitHub, you can think of that as 165 projects. And on average, I commit about 5 times a day. These are some of the projects that I've worked on. I do promise that this is not going to be a sort of boast or sort of platform about me. Again, this is just really to make you realize that the advice that I'm giving you comes from a sort of a concrete foundation. So yeah, I've worked on quite a lot of various projects, and those are my personal projects alone. It's really important to mention, right? So literally 3 years ago, so I think we've got proof here. So 4 years ago now, in December 2016, was my first Hello World application on GitHub. So that was, for those who are kind of not aware of coding, you can think of Hello World as, you can think of that as the first program that anybody would write when learning a language. Sinan, hello, thanks for joining. And Meland as well, thanks for joining. Thanks for letting me know that you can hear everything and everything's working. So yeah, I mean, really, the last point before I start to move on to the content that you actually care about is earlier I mentioned that the times have changed, but not completely. So one thing that you should remember is that there is still the tech atmosphere is still not as open as it could be. So when you're trying to grow in your career, you can't expect everybody to share with you the tips and strategies and how they made it, because the process is very abstract and there's not always a clear, concrete path to success. And so this idea of code hoarding, so where people will hoard their hard work or hoard their secrets, is prominent everywhere. So I see it everywhere I go, everywhere around the world, in China, the US, the UK, Europe. People who are very good generally don't like to share. They will obviously show that they're sharing and open, but they won't share the things that are important to them, which help them make success, and that can be detrimental to organizations. So, we are trying to, part of what I'm trying to do is make things a bit more open and make us a bit more honest about ourselves. For example, such as, my sort of coding background. But one point for you all to be aware of is try not to learn everything, right? So try not to, if you right now, if you look at any job application, and we'll probably go online and we'll just look at a random job application. If you go online and you look for, say, an average app developer role, you'll see a list of items, and half of those items you are not expected to know, right? Or you're expected to have a familiarity with. So this is a common problem that we have in tech today, where recruiters will over-advertise what they want. And so if you try to aim for everything, you might get nothing. And so my point is that a strong engineer is not just a strong technical engineer, right? So as a project manager or an architect or even data scientist, DevOps engineer, you need to build what's called your T-bar, or I think it's called your T-shape, and I'll explain that later on. But essentially, you can think of the T-shape as the I part of the T is your skill. That's what you're good at. So if you're good at data science, then this is all of the things that you're good at in data science. And the T part is you branching out into other skills, into other professions. So you're branching out into people skills, project management, architecture, strategy, governance. A strong engineer in any tech organization has to be a fully rounded engineer. So if you're going to look for a role, which we will cover, I don't think if you focus too much on just the one subject or the one skill set, you may disadvantage yourself. Okay, so this is just again, I'm keeping an eye on the messages, so bring the questions in. This is just to show you some of the things that you might have to learn. So at the point I made, so a DevOps engineer, many people will expect them to know everything here, right? Which is clearly not possible, right? We're all human, and there's no way that somebody who's, say, 25 could master all of these topics. It's just not possible. It's not feasible. And so one of the things that you need to do is to bolster your pragmatism, right? So like I said before, you have to make sure that you're compartmentalizing your educational journey, right? So you're not just growing in one vine, because that will actually limit your career choices. Okay, I'm going to try and... Now we're into the actual stuff which is useful for you, right? So that first bit is a little bit about me and some sort of best practices. But here's what people probably care about, right? Which is what the big organizations look for. So when I say financial institutions, I am also including things like Google, Amazon, some of the big recruiters, IBM as well, because these organizations are so huge. They cover so many different disciplines. They're not just tech providers. And so I'll use the term fintech loosely. And what I mean by that is financial institutions and technical institutions. So we'll start with the professional stuff, because that's more important to the sort of general audience, right? So I've been in positions where I interview candidates quite frequently, and one of the things that I find, especially people that are straight out of university may lack, is they lack the ability to understand how their actions affect on a bigger scale. And so if I was a financial organization and I was looking to employ you or interview you, one of the things that I'm thinking about is, okay, you're good at what you say you're good at, but how well do you work with others? Like, I know this is a very cliche, I'm a team working person, but not just that. I mean, when you build your solution, or when you work on the thing that you work on, are you thinking about the impact on the parallel teams? So an example would be you're a developer, right? Do you do unit testing? But then in addition to that, do you think about integration testing? So how well does your application fit in with the applications around it? So does it reduce the performance of the overall product, right? So that's something you need to kind of think of. And I appreciate that sounds quite technical. If you were, let's say you were a project manager, then the argument would be similar, right? So it'd be something like the solutions that you're tailoring for the requirements that you're given. Do those solutions resonate consistently with what the organization's doing? And that's a really important thing, because it's generally not the case, right? Especially for inexperienced people. They generally are very eager to please and get out their product quickly, because we're all time bound. But over time, that product can become, so whatever that product may be. So, it could be anything from a customer retention database to a sales application, and anything that you rush out generally results as what we call technical debt. And so I will put a caveat to say I do apologize to anybody that finds this quite high level. The reason is that I do want to make sure I'm branching out to everybody. So what I mean by technical debt is regardless of what position that you do, everybody has the ability to create technical debt. And technical debt essentially means something that you did which was good in the short term but bad in the long term. So for example, I could have created an application which pulls in new customers. However, that customer data might be duplicated, or that customer, that process might detract from the overall vision and actually make the product worse. So you have to consider your implications in the wider sense. The other one is the sort of cultural fit. So it's really important, especially if you're kind of new and starting out, or if you're older like me, is to understand in fintech now there are two distinct groupings of tech cultures, and you have to understand prior to your application what that looks like. And so, for example, in new smaller organizations, I'll say more fintech based, like Monzo, Revolut, they are much more focused on fast rollout, and they're much more they're less concerned with documentation, right? So you kind of need to think about how you're going to position yourself in the interview process. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of this because I do appreciate that it's quite a lot. I'm keeping an eye on on the inbound messages, so do ask me questions, but I'm sure you can read. But these are the general things that you kind of need to consider. So from a technical point of view, you need to be a strong engineer, but you need to be thinking of sort of architecture, values, governance, and strategy, right? So you need to have shown that you have some experience with that. And I hope that in the messages you might ask me how you might get that experience. So yeah, there is another point which is really important. So in my last 3 jobs that I've had, every one of them has been a review of my code in GitHub, so my personal stuff. Now you might say, well, I'm a business analyst or project manager, or I want to move into leadership. That might not affect me, right? But what is more common is your personal projects define you, and so when you're applying for roles, don't expect employers not to dig into your projects, because especially if you're trying to compensate for your lack of experience. Okay, so I am I'm keeping an eye on these messages, and I want to talk you through the steps. So this is a really important thing, right? So I'll not kill this to death, but here's the steps which you could take if you're not technical at all. So let's assume that you have no technical background, no technical knowledge, and you want to try and get into tech. One of the things that you kind of need to do is build yourself like something that you can repeat again and again and again. And this is probably what that life cycle looks like. So this is how I did it, right? So first of all, I say I want to learn something. Like I want to learn how to build a web app, or I want to learn how to build a machine learning algorithm that trades stock, right? The first thing obviously is you do a bit of reading, you do a bit of learning. You don't waste all of your time reading into the material, because that's just it's not going to be beneficial for you if you spend all of your time reading and not doing. So you want to get the basic idea, and then you want to try and experiment. So what you might want to do is you might want to look at things such as Stack Overflow, GitHub. There are many tech, I guess what you could call them as tech leaders or tech innovators, speakers on LinkedIn and Twitter, and they constantly share their work. So you can look at their work and trying to modify it for your situation. So the second step is essentially you take something and you play about with it, right? Then you make a change, or you build something really, really simple, 2 lines or 3 lines of code, and you upload it to GitHub. Now, again, if you don't know what GitHub is, it's extremely important that you do a little bit of reading on what that is. It shouldn't take you long. It's essentially a Dropbox for code. It's just a place where you save your code. But GitHub is where you share your code as well. And so what you'll find is when I first started, and people all over the world will put something that they've built and they'll put it on GitHub, and they'll then go and share that on social media. And the thing is, people are generally quite generous. So they will retweet, share, they will like what you've done. It is one of the very small things on social media which is really positive. If you've worked, even if it's something really simple, people generally, like your family, your friends, they'll retweet and share what you've done, and very quickly that disseminates into the professional sphere. You'll be very surprised how quickly something like a small project that you've done on your own to actually make it into the lap of some tech speaking organization, like maybe an outreach company. I mean, in my case, when I started coding, I was scouted by some companies such as like Rework, RBA, Moody's, and some companies from around the world who, I say Moody's was a result of RBA, but essentially those organizations spotted me and then gave me the opportunity to grow and travel the world. And so that all just came from me just sharing my code on GitHub. And the same can happen to you, right? And so obviously, I'm not going to go through it all, but this trend is you building something, putting it where you can share what you've done. So you can think of it like a blog, and repeating the process, right? And as you do that, you're you can think of it as like your repertoire of your experience will grow, right? Because even if you're not in a job, you're consistently putting out products which other people are seeing. It doesn't matter if it's personal, right? It doesn't matter if it's not related to a professional project. People will see that. And the line between professional and social life is quite blurred on social media. So the chances that you will be spotted by a leader such as me is quite high, because I keep my eye out all over LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook for anybody that's posting something that might be useful. I do think it's really important that you learn this process, right? And I'm keeping an eye on the question, so do ask me if you want to understand like any finite detail around that. Again, I do apologize that I might seem slightly distracted. I'm keeping an eye on the messages. Okay, so I'll come back to this because I'm going to try and move on to something which is really important, which I think a lot of people are here for, and I'll come back to that. So, okay, this one's pretty important, right? Which is this idea of escaping poverty, and what I mean by that is so for example, how did I, from somebody who earned about $400 per month, move into a role, into multiple roles. So I've been in multiple roles where, I've been earning at least 10 times that. Now, how is that even possible? Especially given that I couldn't code 3 years ago. Well, let's just sort of talk you through it. Right? Let's just sort of talk you through the processes. So rather than me talk about strategy too much, I'm just going to give you some tips, some really quick fire tips, right? So here's a few things, right? So the first one's quite funny, but it will really help your career. So if you can code, right? So if you are pretty good at what you do, you might want to approach CEOs, right? There are lots and lots and lots of CEOs on LinkedIn, and half of them don't have money, right? So that's me not being disrespectful to CEOs. That's just the way things are, right? A lot of CEOs were people like you, but they've reached a career, they want to take a risk, right? But they are generally much more influential, they have more contacts. And so what you could do is, let's say you're living in Africa, you're living in Nigeria or Kenya or Vietnam, and it's much harder for you to make it into an industry. So one of the things that I would suggest is you do it indirectly. First of all, you volunteer your services to IBM, Google, or like I say, the biggest one is broke CEOs, right? Because Google and IBM are more likely to be picky on who they choose to do volunteer work with. But CEOs of small companies, those CEOs might be really, really successful in the future, and then you've made it anyway, right? So volunteer your services for free, because you're going to learn. You essentially say, look, I don't know everything, but I'd like to help you out. I like your idea. I like your vision. I'd like to work for you for free, maybe every Saturday or Sunday, and you work on a project and you'll learn the other skills that you'll need professionally to move into an organization. Fiverr's a big one as well. So again, Fiverr is, I would say it's a website strongly for economically developing countries. So India, Pakistan, China, Europe, East Europe. Fiverr, you can advertise your services, and there's constantly a demand for, build me a website. I need to build a containerized service. And so you can just simply go in there and register your skills and look for people. So don't just advertise yourself, but keep your eye out for inbound work. The last point, so contracting is a good one, especially if you're I would say if you're slightly younger and you're more willing to take a risk, you can go into contracting. Learning the tax implications is not as hard as you might think. There'll be a lot of help with that as well. So if you feel that you're good enough, or if you feel like you're at the point where you might be good enough, you might want to consider that. I'm going to show you something what a bug bounty is. So a bug bounty, if you're not aware of it, hopefully this should open up. So here's an example of a bug bounty. So you'll find if I click on one of them, I'll click on this one, and you'll see that, okay, this one's, they're offering £3,000, $3,000. SSL is a much lower, I guess, but I'm a bit surprised by that. But you get the idea, right? So you have this place where you can essentially think of it as you volunteer your services to solve a problem, and you get paid if you solve the problem, right? So this is one way you can make money if you're not employed. Another way is Kaggle. So I'll kind of go on to Kaggle as well. So if I go into Kaggle, if you're into data science, you go to Kaggle Compete, and you'll see that there are rewards for projects that you can work on, right? So this is a process in a way that you could, again, let's say you're from a place where you feel like either the world's against you or there's just not enough jobs out there. You can find ways to generate income, build your reputation and brand, and also deliver on projects without having to be employed. I'll jump back to here. So then obviously, if you're kind of even remotely good at AI, then you can work on building ways to generate income as well. If you're good at, say, something else, let's say you're not as good at, say, these technical things, what you could do is you could kind of mix something up. So you can mix something up like your willingness to assist the CEO with educational content. And then you can make money from ads. You can make ad revenue, or you can make collaboration revenue. And I can talk a little bit more about that. And so I'm just reading some of these questions here. Any tips on breaking into project management as a SWE? So for project management, I actually have a whole slide on this, right? Which is, I do feel that, okay, so here's the first thing that you need to be aware of. In tech, project management on paper is outdated, right? And that's, I'll get a lot of slack for this. But what I mean by that is project management is being replaced with project management, the traditional interpretation of developer, tester has been replaced in most organizations with the Agile model. So what that means is that if you actually spend time to learn Agile, and you learn things such as the if you learn the financial implications of Agile, such as like how time and money is fixed and quality and scope is varied, and how the processes, so your stand-ups, your retrospectives, your scrums, if you learn that and put yourself either on a small course or do some of this project work with your friends and try to build an Agile model, work with Jira, that's actually just as useful, right? Because project manager is a very generic term, and a project manager on paper, again, I'm not trying to cause controversy, does not fit in with the Agile model. Neither does my role. And so the best ways to sort of make it into the project management space is to consider things from an Agile point of view, right? So it's to build your Agile knowledge. And so let's see what other questions we've got. It seems the website Fiverr, the website is Fiverr with an extra R. Yeah, sorry, I was just fixing these slides this morning, but yeah, that's a good point. Nan, thank you very much. But definitely keep an eye out for Fiverr, and I'll put the links in the comments below. So I'll make sure that once I'm going to re-release this video after, and I'll put all of the links about the content that I've spoken about. Okay, so other things that you can do, right? So this is if you're pretty good. So I say pros is if you're pretty good at what you do. You might want to consider writing a book, educational content. There's something I should be very, very strict upon educational content. It's not the educational content that's the problem. It's the marketing that's the problem. Given the increase of nations that are entering the coding sphere, right, the number of population that can code is extremely high, or that can teach coding or can teach project management architecture is extremely high. So that means you'll notice it yourself, any forum, AI forum, machine learning, development, project management forum are filled with people trying to sell their course, right? And that is actually really a turn-off. What you want to do is think about the psychology and how you present your educational content to your end users, right? That's really important. I'll not go into this too much, but again, for people who are new to tech, you might want to consider spending time just looking through GitHub and just working through Stack Overflow on your and looking at how people answer questions and try to contribute, right? So I know it's really, really hard, but if you spend some time on something that you're really interested in, you might be able to offer solutions, make fixes, and this actually builds your reputation quite heavily in the tech industry. There's a story of the person who created Homebrew for Apple. So I don't know if you're aware of what Homebrew is, but Homebrew is like one of the most important package managers on Mac operating system, and that person was rejected for a job because they didn't know how to invert a binary tree. I remember it now. So essentially, the person invented one of the most useful tools for Mac developers like me, and I use Homebrew all the time. And that person was extremely high in the professional sphere, but one company decided to reject him because he couldn't invert a binary tree, and I think that company was Google. But the point I want to get across there is that the perception of skill and quality is highly subjective. And so really, you shouldn't be trying to judge yourself based upon the opinions of others. You should be judging yourself based upon the things that you do each week in your spare time. And that's just my own personal opinion. So I'm keeping an eye on the comments, nothing else at the moment. So yeah, so these are some ideas that you can do, right? So here's some ideas that you can generate revenue, but anything that you do here will actually generate additional contacts. It's going to build your network, and it's going to build your brand. Okay, so let's move on to the next step, right? So I'm going to keep this topic open. So I do want you to ask more questions if you're still unsure about ways that you want to sort of generate revenue in a position where you're unable to get a role. Okay, this is really important. So where to start? I'll touch on this in an earlier slide as well, but there's a statistic which shows the majority of people who, so if we look at a job description, let me just quickly pull one up, right? So I'm going to pull up let's see, let's think of a developer job. So I'll say, I'll do DevOps, London roles, right? Let's just quickly look at a role. Let's look at a job role, and we'll talk you through the process, right? So let's just pick a random one, see if we can get a breakdown of right. Okay, so this one is much more verbal, right? And verbose. Okay, so if you look at something here, and this might not be the best example, but I'll just explain it to you how it works. Right, imagine I'm the recruiter, or imagine I'm the recruiter or the recruiting manager for this role, and I've just put down, this is all the stuff that I want, right? So generally the way a contract will work is they'll say something about the company, this is something that I want, this is what I want from engineers, this is what I expect minimum, and then something about culture, right? So that's generally the way a job application will look. And what happens is, so there's psychology, Simon Sinek talks about this, and I don't mean to be divisive, but I'm just stating the fact, which are inexperienced and young engineers, and particularly women, so women in tech, will only apply for a role if they reach 50% or more, only apply for a role if they reach, I can't remember, 60, a number, right? So let's say 70%. And so they might look through this and they might say, and this is not a generalization, this is based upon statistical empirical evidence. They might look at this and say, oh, I can do Terraform, but I can't do Ansible, so I'm not going to apply for the job because I can't do Ansible. And that's a really wrong mentality. And so what happens is it doesn't mean that one group of applicants are better than the other. What it means is the confidence level in certain groups of people are lower, right? And so what you'll find is somebody like me or somebody that has been in the industry a bit longer, this is how they'll approach the question. They'll say, I could do Dockers, but I can't do Kubernetes. I've done a bit of OpenShift, but I know OpenShift kind of uses Kubernetes, and I know Docker uses Kubernetes, so I could probably learn Kubernetes. I've only done a little bit of Terraform, but I've done Ansible, and I know what configuration as code means, so I could probably learn Terraform, right? And so quickly what they're doing is they're going through the list of requirements, and they're bottling down, like, this is what I can do, I could learn that, this is what I don't know, right? And so that's the approach which resonates most successfully with jobs, right? So what I mean by that is, that's the approach where if you don't apply, then you have no chance. And that's not me saying to apply to every job, but what you need to do is you need to look where you have parallel skills. So where you know something which is similar to something else. And so what you then do is you then build up some familiarity with that. And so, it's a really important fact. It's a really, really important fact, right? Which is, we do see a kind of asymmetry in the applications of roles, right? So there seems to be the same kind of people applying for jobs. So this is me not talking about my personal experience. I'm talking about statistical data produced, right? And so one of the reasons is it's to do with the confidence level of people who apply for the roles. And so you need to kind of understand where you might actually still be a very valuable candidate. Don't write yourself off just because you don't tick 2 or 3 of the boxes. That's not the correct approach in modern day tech. One other thing is competency-based interviewing. So again, I do appreciate that there'll be some people here with high experience, and okay, we've got some more comments coming in. I'll finish this and I'll address the comments. So I do appreciate that some people read this and say, this is obvious. But competency-based interviewing is what is the standard of interviewing techniques globally, especially for big organizations. Because the way competency-based interviews work is they focus on eking out your professional skills. And so if you don't know what that is, you need to learn it. And you need to learn it quite quickly. It's things such as questions such as, how have you dealt with a conflict in the workplace, and how have you resolved that? So they're situational based questions, and you need to learn them. Okay, so I'm going to move into the questions before I kind of go on to the next thing. So, finding it challenging to learn DevOps. And from an operations almost 12 years, but all the latest requirements ask for DevOps skills. How one can show its experience without working on it? Great question, Suresh. So I'm hope that you were there for the previous part. So this question from Suresh, I'm going to break it down, and I'll break it down Barney style. What it means is I'll put it into as simple categories as I can. The first thing is expectations are mostly unrealistic, right? So this is really, really important to learn. I wish I had a slide on this, but again, if you imagine, I'll draw a picture. I'll just explain it to you. If you imagine, right, how is most jobs advertised, right, in big, large organizations, or even small, fast-moving organizations? The jobs are not advertised by the person who wants the job, who wants to give the job. So let me give an example. Let's say I'm the head of, app development, right? And I say, I need a new developer now. I don't just go and start looking on LinkedIn and say, does anybody want a job, right? Generally what happens is I'll put a request in, or an offer will be put into my department and say, we have capacity for 2 more roles, right? And so I say, yes, I'll have those 2 roles. But almost all of the time, it's a separate department or organization that deals with applications, interviewing, and competency, right? And what that means is when you kind of say the point, which is like, I've been in DevOps for 10 years and I still don't know DevOps. I know. And that's because the people that are putting out the requirements don't know DevOps, right? And so I do appreciate there'll be some people here that are like, I don't even know what DevOps is anyway. Fine, just assume this is any kind of technical competency, that's any technical role. Say it's as a developer, a DevOps engineer, data scientist, product manager, business analyst, architectural lead. any of these roles are the way that those roles are advertised, and that job description I just showed you. So this I think I got rid of it, but the job description is not written by is rarely written by the people, the managers who want the staff. And so what that means is there's a disconnect in what they're actually looking for. So the first point is don't assume that you need to have all of those skills, because that's not the case. Now, if you are trying to get into DevOps, what you might want to do is you might want to consider things such as the core fundamental concepts, right? So configuration as code, idempotence, that means deploying a solution which is the same every time that you deploy it. Learn Agile. You can supplement the skills that you don't have with professional skills that are required for the role. Now, for the technical side of the tools that you don't have, now, if you know Ansible and Terraform, you've got a foot in the door. Or if you know Ansible and CloudFormation, you've got a foot in the door. If you can do cloud, you're 80% ahead of the competition, because most DevOps roles these days are confused with cloud engineer. And so I'm sorry my answer isn't simple, because it's extremely you picked a role which unfortunately is, like I picked, is open to interpretation, and so your mission must be to learn what the core competencies. For me, that is Jenkins, Ansible, sysadmin, so understand terminal, command line, understand automation. So what I mean by automation, like rather than somebody manually saving and sending data, you build a pipeline to do that, right? So understand CI/CD pipelines. You could work with one toolkit. So you could work with something like GitLab, which will have a tool for each different thing, source code management, deployment, orchestration. But the thing is that once you kind of start working on those tools, if you don't have the ability to get that experience in the workplace, and so this is for everyone now, if you do not have the opportunity to gain in-office experience, if you're not employed or if you're not being given the work that you want, then you have to go back to that escaping poverty slide that I showed you. You need to build your own projects in your own spare time. I apologize, if you think, well, that's not fair. Why do I have to waste my spare time on developing myself? Because the reason you have to waste your spare time, and I'm going to speak not from the heart, just statistically, is 20 or 30 years ago, the expectation was impossible. Nobody here watching this video, including myself, would have entry to a high caliber role, such as a COBOL developer. You either went in there from apprenticeship and did your 10 years, or Java developer, or you have no. That's it. You've got no entry. You've got no path. Today is different, right? So today you can accelerate your path because of the need for developers, the need for tech talent. You don't need to go down a traditional route of taking a university degree. You can accelerate that path, but it has to be done in your own time. And the way to do that in your own time is to give yourself projects. So a quick recap, that is, help out CEOs, do bug bounties, fix problems or do issue resolution in GitHub, Stack Overflow, contribute to community, so open source, generally contribute to open source works. Reach out, I reached out to, one example is I reached out to OpenAI. I don't know if you're aware who they are, but they're a very big company sponsored by, they were originally sponsored by Elon Musk. And as soon as I heard Elon Musk in the paper had put money into them, I sent the top guy an email and saying, could I get a role? And he replied back, because the company was really, really small, right? And by the time that the news came out with Elon Musk, there was maybe 2 days before that email got shut down, right? And so I made that small passage where I got a reply. The problem was that it was only roles in America, but that's fine. I got the reply, right? The point is that my eye was on the ball, right? So you follow the news, you might hear something like, IBM has invested in this company, or a bank has invested in that company. If you see the news article and it's 1 or 2 days old, reach out to them and offer your services. Okay, so this is another good point as well, right? And I realize that was a bit of a bit of a detour, which is we're all human, right? And there's the intimidation you see, especially people flaunt that they can do everything. There are tech super rock stars out there. But the truth of the matter is, if they were to die, or if I was to die, I know this is really grim and morbid, but if I was to die tomorrow, at least my life and my work is preserved on GitHub, on Kaggle, Stack Overflow, right? Which your work will be as you grow. And if somebody was to look back at my name and look through my work, they'd only remember me for one or two projects, right? So very rarely it's almost like the music industry, right? It's really hard to find a singer that just consistently puts out hits, right? That's extremely rare, right? Most of us can produce one or two really good things of value. And those one or two good things of value is something that we spend maybe 6 months, a year, and 2 years on. But don't worry about that, right? Sure, though, they will define you in the long run. But that doesn't mean that you stop working on smaller projects, right? Because the smaller things that you do, even the half-day course that you did, builds your knowledge up and bolsters your ability to deliver on that one or two project that defines you. Okay, this is a big one. Thanks, Mitchell. I got your message. Thanks for doing this. Shout out to Mitchell. Shout out to Suresh, Carlos, Miland. A shout out to Chingnan. Shout out to everybody on the stream. I think I've got a question in from Mitchell. I'll do this first, Mitchell, and then I'll get back to your question. So, most cloud engineers are not properly certified, right? So this is something I'd like to open up with because, again, I am, because the reason for me doing this was because of the institutional discrimination that we're seeing recently, and I want to try and help out. But there is one mistake that I am seeing, and I'm just being honest here. I've traveled the world. I speak 7 languages, so don't take this as a criticism. But there's something that people from developing countries, which I know are following my channel, a big mistake that's made, and it's actually a big mistake that's made in the West, but it's more prominent in the East and the South because there's less big job opportunities, and that is defining yourself by your certification. That is, for me, my own personal opinion, and again, I've been on both sides of the interview table, right? And so, in my opinion, that's not good, right? Because if you pass an AWS Solutions Architect exam, right, or if you pass a Cisco exam, cyber exam, that's not a badge of honor that you are an expert. It's a badge of honor that you have foundational knowledge, regardless. Even if you did, I think the hardest exam I'm aware of is the AWS DevOps specialist or the machine learning, I think it's like the machine learning data analyst expert or something, right? Even those of the highest level of certification, which could take you 2 or 3 years, employers don't look at that. Only a very small sliver of employers will be looking for that ultimate certification because not many people have that certification, right? So if you're aiming for that to begin with, then give yourself a 10-year journey or a 5-year journey. There's no problem with that. But that's not going to get you a job quickly, and that's not going to get you into tech quickly, right? So certification, yes, is good. I'm not saying don't advertise your certification. Please do advertise it. It's really important that we see that you've put the effort in to learn. But it's not if you apply for a job and I see, I'm not talking from my company, I'm just talking generically here, a disclaimer I should make, so this is just me personally. If I'm looking at applicants, right, in any of the roles where I've been the interviewer, I'll look at the certification and go, good, I like that. Now, if I decide to give you a chance to come and do the interview, I'm not going to be just saying like, okay, how's the weather? I'm going to be drilling you on low-level questions, right? So yeah, you can pass an exam. That means nothing in the real world. And especially, you've kind of got to think yourself from my position, right? If I'm in a small company and I've only got you say $2 million for funding, and I need 10 employees, right? That's not going to last me so long. So I need somebody who's going to work really, really hard, right? And so part of that is I need to see that somebody has the experience or has the ability to deliver solutions that I want. And certification is not the way to do that. Certification is only a benefit. It's a plus. It's a bonus. You need to show experience in some way, even if that's your personal experience. Yeah, and so but that said, I should contradict myself, which is there are organizations which seek out certified engineers, right, and understand who they are. I think one of them, straight off the top of my head, is Cloud. They're a cloud training organization. I can't think of them, but there are organizations out there. I think Google, in some certain roles, will require you to have GCP certification. If you really want to do that, then you need to spend time and identify which companies require certification. But remember, most of them don't, right? So I've not been on a panel where we've demanded certification. Only I do mention cloud because that is where more and more certification is becoming demanded, but still not what defines you. Okay, so let's look at this question. Any thoughts on direction cybersecurity is heading? At least in terms of how it relates to other tech fields, trends, misconceptions. Yes, 100%. So for me, cyber and cybersecurity in general are trending in three directions, right? So there's, you still have your analysts, you still have your forensics and things like that. But what seems to be really, and I'll use the word sexy at the moment, is this idea of, I'll try to keep this basic as well for those who aren't techie savvy, but it's like visualizations, right? So Splunk, what in cybersecurity I might call SIEM or SOIM and all of these things is essentially visualization, monitoring, proactive monitoring. Right? So that's becoming really, really hot at the moment. And so the reason why proactive monitoring is becoming really hot in cybersecurity is because it ties in with data, right? And so if you consider cybersecurity 10 or 15 years ago, it was majority rules-based, right? So I'll take an example for a cybersecurity relating to a bank and a transaction. They might say, if somebody has been spending on average $500 a month, but this month they spend $200, flag them and block their account and give them a call and then only open their account until they've verified their identity. Now, that's really not good. But that is the way that banks used to work 20 years ago. Now, the way it works is that we have data that we can use, right? So we can actually analyze the long-term trend of a user, a customer, a client, right? Regardless if it's in banking or not. And we can then use things that are less rules-based to make the decisions, right? So we could say things such as neural networks, machine learning models. So you don't need to know that. But that obviously in cybersecurity, in order for you to, again, this is the holistic thinking, right? So this is like, I want to be a cybersecurity person. How do I learn the skills for tomorrow? Well, you don't just need to do that. You need to learn the skills that you have now, how they integrate with the skills tomorrow. One of them is availability of data and visualization. And so that's where I kind of roll into the monitoring, proactive monitoring. The other side is intelligent response. So that will be machine learning, analytics. You can think of companies like Darktrace, Secure Code Warrior. So these are companies that are on the front line of cyber. And so I'll put the links in, but there's a lot of companies, CrowdStrike, Bloodhound. There are many data insights companies, and that's clearly where cybersecurity is going, right? Because as things get more complex, it can be managed by rules and it can be managed by humans. So I hope that helps. It's just fancy. It's just a fancy tax collector. Yes, that's a good point. So on the certificates, Ching Nan says it's just a fancy way to collect tax for these people that create certifications, and there's definitely some truth to that, but I won't comment too much. Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit technical. is there anybody here, like, please drop me a message if you want me to continue on the professional area. But for probably the next half hour, I'm going to go quite deep on different technical elements. So please stop me if there's something that you think that you want to get more assistance on general level. But until then, I'm going to move into app dev, DevOps, AGILE, and I think there might be a bit of cyber as well. So I'm just going to read through these and explain to you. So, okay, this is for people who want to get into coding but maybe don't have that much experience. And where are you going to start? So the first thing is like, learn to be a good developer. What does that mean? What does being a good developer mean? Well, it's actually, most of it is built around culture, process, and strategy, right? What do I mean by that? If you look at Spacex, or I think I posted in LinkedIn last week about Spacex hiring requirements, and I think it was like 25 points that they made. Being able to thread a language, or being able to optimize a certain application or container platform is good. Yeah, so you can do something powerful, something strong and robust, but that's not what they're going to hire you for. What they're going to hire you for is a specific skill set, and let me try to think. It's almost like a specific personality that you'll have in terms of development, and it can be sought out very quickly. I'll give you some examples. So you could think of, if you think of companies that fail, the large majority of those that fail as a result of a poor product is because they have poor engineers and generate very high amount of technical debt. They're not doing unit testing. They're not thinking proactively. They have no strategy and they have no governance, right? And so these are all the failings of small or big companies that are they're just poor quality. And so to be a good engineer means to things like this, right? So it's things like, when I work on my project, or when my boss tells me to do something, when I work on that, am I considering how this application that I'm building affects the runtime of the product? Am I considering how I manage and move data? Am I considering the reusability of my code? Right? So one of the things which is really popular right now is code reuse. So are you building something, think of it in Lego blocks if you're not a coder, like, are you building something that can be lifted and implemented somewhere else? Do you understand microservices? So do you understand the difference between monolithic traditional services and microservices? What are the trade-offs between the two? Do you understand things such as the builder's pattern? So if you're a Java developer or you're into object orientation, are you aware of the builder's pattern? If you're procedural, then you might want to say, are you aware of Jackson Structured Programming, JSP, right? So procedural, JSP, object oriented, the builder's pattern. It goes without saying that the best practices will trump your skill anytime. Because even if you're not that great a coder, if you're consistent and your code is well commented and you have the ability to show that what you're producing has quality, like, for example, if you even think about quality, if you even like, because the skills disparity in people, right, because there are people at all different levels, almost everybody feels dumb, right, at some level. And when they're building something, they're too much focused on to get it working, right? Like, I've tried this, it's not working. And they end up doing things that they don't understand. This is a real big problem. And so what I mean by that is there's clearly a desire to just get it done and to get it out the window. And so if you're not thinking about quality, it becomes really obvious, especially at the interview stage. It's the things that I look for, right? So I'm not looking for, like, what do you know about Jenkins? Or what do you know about method overriding, or overloading, right? They're not the only questions I'm looking for. I'm actually ascertaining your kind of personality as a developer. Okay. I appreciate this might be a bit dry, so I'm going to keep an eye on the questions and make sure that I won't stay on this too long. understand the software development lifecycle, right? So think of the way that code leaves your hands, and how did the code come into your hands? Where does it go next? What happens in the overall process, right? So like, think about the business implication prior to you, like the allocation of assets, the allocation of time and resources, and then think about the allocation of time and resources that would be required to maintain and deploy your code. It's quite straightforward. But software development lifecycle is very specific. I'm not going to go through all of that, but obviously, testing is unbelievably important. Even if you're just a developer and you're like, I just want to do unit testing, I don't care about anything else. Like, spend some time and learn like regression testing, learn smoke testing, learn how integration testing, like for example, if you're in a traditional organization, try and do some integration testing, which might be done by a separate team, like the environments team. How much an attitude of an interviewee matter? Thanks, Meland. This is a big one, right? So like, I'm going to be honest, right? So I'll be honest about something I can't get in trouble for too much. So when I was in China, right, and I was fortunate enough because I speak fluent Chinese, and I'm sorry, Qinggan, if I've said your name incorrectly. I'm not sure of the tones, but I speak fluent Chinese, and I've interviewed candidates in Chinese, Mandarin, and for certain companies which I can't name, but there have been a few times, and I could just say for any of the roles where I've spotted bad actors, which I'll cover later on as well, where I've spotted potentially destructive candidates, which could be really bad. What does that look like? I'll give you an example. I interviewed somebody where I asked them about a product. I said to them, it was a product which we were working on. It's really, really important. It's like it's a really famous product. And think of it, there's like a Diet Coke and a Coke, right? So there's the product that I have, which is the Diet Coke or the Pepsi. Let's say the Coke. And there's a competition one, which is Pepsi. And he came in, or she came in, and I asked them about, what experience do you have with that? And they kind of laughed and joked, and they went, "Oh, you use Coke? Pfft, that's rubbish. I wouldn't use that. That's stupid." And straight away, you could see if you were in my position, that would be an alarm bell, right? Because this person, they don't even know anything about the organization, and yet immediately they're making an assumption that tool is wrong, right? So the interview of the candidate or interviewee, the personality and the attitude is paramount. It's extremely important. Hold on a second. There's one reason why. There's one really, really important reason why, which is something which I can't control and you can't control. Again, if you look at the psychology of software development and interviews in general, you'll find that various different sources will equate a certain amount of, I just liked you. I gave you the job because I just liked you. I'm not saying that's me, but I'm saying that is what you will see, right? And when you yourself grow, you'll find yourself tempted by that as well, right? And I'm not, again, this is nothing specific to my history, but you find yourself tempted as the interviewer to relate to somebody that relates to you, right? And so a good, strong interviewer is somebody that can compartmentalize their emotional connection to a candidate and evaluate themselves, evaluate the candidate professionally. That's really hard. And I don't see that happening all the time, because what you'll see people say, candidate A was perfect, but didn't seem to resonate with our culture. And candidate B had 80%, but was a strong culture fit. That might be true. And that might actually be the basis for employment. And in some cases that is true. It's good advice to employ somebody that is both a culture fit and a technical fit. However, you could be lying to yourself. You could be just saying, I like that person, and they might not be 100% fit. And that other person might be a much better cultural fit, and vice versa, right? So the point is, you may find yourself as an interviewee feeling like you're trying to please people. Now, my advice is that's very tempting, but that's a very bad strategy because humans vary in personality. So if you adopt a certain personality type for an interview, you're only going to get certain kinds of jobs, right? And so depending on how popular your personality as a person is, may depend on your job success. What you want to do is you want to be what's called, in psychological terms, you want to be agreeable, right? What does that mean? So agreeable means that you don't apply assumptions. You present yourself honestly, forthrightly. You present yourself in the position that you want the job and that you want to work hard for the job. Now, of course, that doesn't mean being fake, but it does mean, again, to the point, you want to make sure that your approach to interviewing is not personality specific, because if you go down that route, I mean, you could do that, right? You could find that, for example, I've been in positions where certain candidates have tried to do certain strategies to resonate with me, and sometimes I feel that working, but sometimes it's really obvious, right? So I'll give you one last example before I move on. It's obvious that there are people who like, say, football. Now, if I interview somebody and I say, I'm a Liverpool fan, you might get the job, but then you might not be happy because you might be working in a role which you weren't prepared for and doesn't resonate with you. So, I mean, I know I'm not answering this very well, but in my opinion, it's because it's very hard and it's very subjective. But in my opinion, yes, it definitely does matter. So I'm looking at the more questions here. So I know you guys can sort of read as I go through this. You actually have the perfect pronunciation of my name. Thank you very much. Puneet asks how to assess a job description to identify if the employer is looking for a specialist or generalist. Great question. You can't is the answer. The reason why is because the job description, well, you kind of can actually. So what you could do is you could build a neural network which could scan all of the job CVs out of there, all of the job applications out there of the application descriptions, and then link them to a label of general or not general. But that's not going to be possible for you or me. So, So how would you as a person know if they're looking for a generalist or a specialist? There's a few tricks that you can do, right? So the first trick is you reach out to the hiring manager. You reach out to the hiring manager, not the recruitment manager who put the post up. So now that's not devious. That's not saying that you're allowed. You can request the details of the hiring manager, right? Because the problem is you have a chain. So you have hiring manager wants a person, the recruiting manager puts the ad up, and you looks for the job. And really, the person in the middle, I'm not being detrimental to recruitment managers, but recruitment managers generally are not technically literate. So essentially, you're playing Chinese whispers between three people. And so what you might want to do is reach out to the hiring manager and just say, I saw this advertisement for the role. I'm extremely interested, although I'm slightly worried because I don't know if you're looking for a generalist or a specialist. And they might, generally they'll be very responsive. But if you don't have that option, there are other things that you can do, right? If they list, I want Ansible, Chef, Puppet, Nolio, they're looking for a generalist, right? I want Terraform, Troposphere, CloudFormation, they're looking for a generalist, right? I want somebody with Java knowledge, Python knowledge, React, Node, C++, Assembler, COBOL, they're looking for a generalist, right? The what you can do is when they're not looking for a generalist, you'll see the role is much more specific, right? And what you'll see is you'll find less. This is actually a really good point. You'll find less parallel skills that you have if it's not a generalist role, because the way that they'll put the job spec is each individual item will be disconnected from the one previously, right? Because they have a platform, for example, to support. So they'll be looking for something in automation, a specific kind of coding, a specific kind of testing. And so you'll find that you'll find that you'll be much less of a fit for a specialist role than you would a generalist role based upon the criteria. I hope that kind of helps. Okay, so I know I've been talking about this and you've probably read most of the AI toolkit, so I'm not going to go into it too much unless you've actually got a question. But these are the sort of general things that you should probably learn. You need to learn things such as the ML pipeline. That's different from an orchestration pipeline. So an ML pipeline is the process of taking data and producing your final deployed solution. And there's about 6 steps in there, and you need to understand those from a high level. You do need a bit of maths background, but depending on the role, will vary the amount of math, right? Because a lot of ML engineers are not very math literate, and a lot of data scientists might not be either, right? Because a lot of companies are looking for the practical application, right? One point on machine learning before I move is most organizations are not looking to further research. Yeah? So what do I mean by that? Well, most machine learning libraries are pretty complete, right? So they're pretty robust and they've been worked on quite heavily. So if they're looking for you to expand and build a bespoke in-house machine learning application, then the requirement for math is PhD level. Yeah. So if they're just saying we're looking to build a responsive intelligent service that utilizes machine learning, then you probably don't need a lot of math because a lot of the tools are out the box. But so again, this is back to the understanding of the job description. The level of math will be really evident, yeah. Because if they're asking you to build something from scratch, you need to know the mathematical fundamentals. So not just linear algebra, right? You need to be, excuse my French, shit hot, yeah? So it's important to know that. Here's a bit more that you kind of need to know. These are the basics. I'll not go through them all, but essentially, if you want to be just a good machine learner, a good, build AI products and not be too overzealous, Python is the one for you, especially for sort of testing and things. But if you're focused on performance, speed, and you do want to do a little bit of building from scratch, then C++ is for you. Jupyter Notebooks, you kind of all need to learn that. I advise learning that whatever you are, to be honest. I advise if you're a project manager or if you're a BA, you need to learn Jupyter Notebooks, and I'm going to show you why on the next slide. In fact, I'm going to show you why now, because it's really important. This is why you need to learn Jupyter Notebooks. I'd be interested, if anybody could put in the comments, just say yes or no, do you know Jupyter Notebooks? I'd be very interested to see what people think. But I'm going to explain this while I wait for your comments to come in, right? So let's just look at the how this works, right? Imagine you are I'll use the physics example again. Or shall I say physics? Yeah, we'll use the physics example, right? So let's say you're actually, I don't like it because it's not as let's say you're an electrical engineer and you're working for a company and you've produced a component or a piece of software that's going to optimize power flow for the company, right? Now, that's really complicated because you've got so many different audiences, right? You've got the business, you've got the professional experts, and then you've got the more academic people that you need to satisfy that your model, whatever you've worked on, is good. Now, traditional coding will look like alien text to people who don't know coding, right? It's going to look like gobbledygook. So you can't I don't want to lose you here, but I'll try and, this is a hard thing to articulate, right? The world is becoming more connected, right? More and more people need to learn coding, right? If you're a music artist or if you're a film director, everybody's learning coding, right? Now, the problem is that you then need to find a way to communicate with people outside of your sphere, right? And you can't just show them code and just say, oh, here's my code, and that's, you either know it, you don't. You're going to need to build a presentation layer that can keep everybody focused, right? Which is kind of what I'm finding hard to do with you guys at the moment. So let's just work our way through it. So this part might be for the top boss, right? So the top professional boss who wants to know the underlying fundamental solution for what you built, right? And so Jupyter Notebooks will allow you to present your solution with images and formulas that they can understand. Then the middle bit is like what you present to your fellow engineers, right? So you're giving a talk and you talk about the basic fundamentals, and so this will appeal to your top boss. This will appeal to your colleagues, and the bottom part might appeal to the business. For example, they might say, well, we're looking for this waveform. Okay, you've got this waveform. And so Jupyter Notebooks or other things. So there's another thing called Spectacle, I think it's called, for JavaScript, which is the equivalent. You need to think of this idea of literate programming. I'm pretty sure you've read this by now, but essentially it's mixing code, images, and graphs so that people from different audiences can understand what you're doing, because we're working in a more integrated environment. Alan says, no, I just watch you using it. Thanks, Alan. Chingnan says, I know Jupyter Notebooks, but I think it's just for people who are too lazy to install Python on their computer. Right, so that's the point, Chingnan. Try to think, no, it isn't, right? Because when you are going to, and I actually used to think that as well, right? So I used to think, Jupyter Notebooks is for people who can't manage packages. They get it with Anaconda. But like, you need to present your work, right? Especially in an agile environment, right? So when in modern working environments, as we move more and more to the agile model, you have to do sprint demos, right? Or retrospectives. And that means explaining to the business or architects or leaders or people who have no coding knowledge what the hell that you've done. And that's why you want to mix your code with your alternate images and things which will appeal to them. I'll not go over it too much because I know it's quite boring. Okay, so Alan from like the saying, it's multi-level presentation of your code and ideas, though behind the scenes you really have to do Python. You really need to have Python installed. Yeah, it's exactly, Alan. So it's all about presentation, and I think that's one of the main reasons for this talk is to kind of help people from sort of more disadvantaged areas or people who just wanted to try and get into tech. And part of that, in my opinion, is relating your work to people who don't understand what you do. And I think, see if we've got any more. Python is a prereq, but I can see Scala and R being available if using Anaconda. Yeah, good point, Milland. So Milland says he's used it as well. So I've got one from Mitchell. When I talk to people who are studying AI, I hear unusual amounts of jargon and hype about what they actually research. Without the hype, where is the bleeding edge of AI research today? Good question. Okay, so maybe I should just jump back to the AI bit, so to make sure people don't know I'm talking about the right thing, and then I'll go to DevOps. So, cutting edge AI research is becoming splintered. I'll be as quick as I can before I move on to the DevOps part. It's clearly obvious that the pace of academic progress and the pace of implementation, the gap is closing. What do I mean by that? Well, neural networks existed in the 50s. So did most machine learning algorithms, right? So most like SVMs and decision trees, random forest, linear regression, all of that stuff has existed long before any of us were born, right? And so 50 years ago, academia was here and practical implementation was here because we didn't have the compute, right? I'm not going to give you all the examples, but that is one of the accepted reasons why AI is taken off today is we have the compute, right? So clearly now we have the compute, we've kind of caught up and we've done all of that. So we've done neural networks, like we're like literally a 7-year-old could deploy a neural network image recognition algorithm by clicking on something in one of these applications which deploy them out of the box. Now, so that essentially means that the engineering side is caught up with academia, and academia are finding themselves a bit lost because we're now hitting the absolute limits of the performance of neural networks, right? Because there are things such as what's called local maximas and local minimas, which is a big problem they have today. And the idea of generalized learning is another big problem that we have today. So there's a lot of problems. So the cutting edge of research is splintered into multiple domains. The first domain is about performance enhancement, right? So there are a lot of research papers out there. I think Alan actually shared something with me earlier about one-shot learning, which was recent academia, yeah. So because now we can do it, the academic tomorrow is how to do it better. So that's one part. The other part is about data transportation layers, so things such as like encoding. So there's a lot of research in more sophisticated and simpler ways, sophisticated or simpler ways to encode data. So again, you're maximizing performance. Then you have a different segment, which is generalized learning. And that is really hot at the moment in AI academia. So there's a thing called the digital neural computer. And what that is it's a form of artificial intelligence which uses a RAM. Yeah, so it uses RAM as, I think, short-term memory. And the way that works is by having this detached RAM, it can learn, it has the ability to mix short-term and long-term memory. One of the best examples of that is an AI that can tell you where you are in the London Underground. So this was an OpenAI, it was a DeepMind paper. And what they did was they actually linked multiple neural networks together. So one of them was image recognition. So it recognized the subway map, right? But the other one, when you think, well, that's not good, that's not impressive because I use Google Maps every day. Yeah, but Google Maps is rules-based, right? And what this is actually the linking the conceptual similarities between what you see and what you hear. Right. So for example, it would generate text and say, from where you are, go out here, take a right, get on that place, and it's not doing that by a rules engine. It's doing that by connecting the conceptual elements. And so that's where academia is working hard on. So it's essentially working on ways to combine different neural network types together or machine learning types together in a way that they become more general. We're still a long way from that, but that's kind of where we are on academia. So I'm keeping an eye on the questions here. Okay, good. So we're kind of limited there. DevOps Toolkit. This is true, right? So as I mentioned earlier, I see myself as a DevOps expert, but it doesn't matter if I said I see myself as a DevOps beginner, because the only classification and validation of your capabilities as a DevOps engineer is yourself. The reason why I say that is because in the DevOps space, there's a problem with defining what it actually means. Yeah, so like I'll just speak freely. You'll see DevOps application job specs which will say looks like a cloud engineer, looks like a SRE, looks like somebody who does support. I've worked in DevOps roles in multiple organizations. One of them I've been an app developer, one of them I've been a Scrum Master, one of them I've been environments, like managing only environments. One of them I've been support. And so actually the on paper definition of DevOps, you don't need me to tell you that, right? You can just go and Google it and I'll just give you a list, a bullet point of, orchestration, pipelines, blah, 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 right? But in actuality, what happens is because DevOps is so hot, in fact, let's just show you something. Because DevOps is so hot at the moment, the demand for more things is higher. I'll show you what I mean. So if we say average DevOps salary, we'll go for UK, right? Okay, so I just come up as senior consultant 100k, but I just realized I put it in the wrong browser window. But so let's have a look. Okay, so I don't know about what you're thinking, but for me, considering the average salary in the UK is like 28 grand, and then the average household income is like 30, 32 grand, that's pretty high, right? And you've got to say to yourself, like, why is it quite high, right? It's considerably higher than entry level developer or Scrum Master or BA, PM, right? It's pretty high. So this is saying the average DevOps engineer salary. So what that's doing is it's taking the junior level DevOps engineer, which could be paid anything, right? You could literally be paid anything. Junior level DevOps engineer, I've seen everything from 20 grand like up to 80 grand. And I shit you not. It's unbelievable. And that's globally as well. But then, so it just takes the average of that, right? And so why? Like why would that be the case? And especially for people, like, again, people from developing nations, right? You'll look at that and go like, what? And that's how I looked at it. Like, so when I, personal point here, when I was with my wife, when she first came to the UK, we were looking at job roles. And at the time, I was on like 21, 22. And I thought I'd never make the salary that I'm on. And I was like, I actually get angry. I used to get really aggressive, right? Because people, like, not just my wife, but friends would be like, oh, that person's making that salary. And I'm like, it's corrupt, it's blah, 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 and all of that. And I found out the truth, right? I found out the way it works. And the way it works is like this. Is the DevOps engineer role is poorly classified. It's poorly defined. It's poorly defined because it's new, right? And it's not as new as a data scientist or a machine learning engineer, but it's central to everything, right? And I don't mean to put down any other discipline, but the most companies look at a DevOps person as like a jack of all trades. Like they don't expect you to just be a person that builds pipelines and do deployment. That's very rare. I don't see that much in my career. They expect you to do everything. And if you don't know everything, you kind of have to pretend you do. And that's part of the problem of the role because it's poorly defined. And it causes people like, people here who have issues getting into the field because they don't know what they should be learning. And so, I kind of feel like I've gone on a bit of a tangent there. I've got some more questions here, so I'll read them out. But essentially, let's just talk about the basics here, right? What do you really need? You need to be good at orchestration, right? So that means like TeamCity, Jenkins. You need to understand configuration as code. So you need to understand things such as like CloudFormation or Ansible or Puppet. That means scripted language, which is in a certain context such as JSON or YAML, which can be run to execute and deploy assets, shall we say, assets or elements. You need to be strong and agile, right? And I'm going to move on to that next because that's probably the most important thing. I've got some Chinese comments, but I will cover that in the next part as well. So I'm just keeping an eye on the comments to make sure I'm not going on to too much detail here. I don't want to bug you down with too much. I mean, I know you can read, but essentially, just in a summary, know that it's poorly defined. Work on learning the fundamentals of DevOps, Agile, be good at other stuff. So like, don't be amazing, but like learn a little bit of unit testing, like learn a little bit of like how to develop an application, learn a little bit of like project management, because as a DevOps engineer, you're in the center of all other departments, right? Because they all flow into you because you build the pipeline, right? So you kind of need to speak in a language that everybody understands. Okay, let's just see. So, 我好像听懂英语，再见了. Okay, 再见. So that's one of our Chinese viewers that's leaving. It's probably late in China. One from Millen saying, I still believe DevOps is a misnomer coined by Gene Kim. Yeah, I agree 100%. It is a misnomer. I spoke to Patrick, and he says that he thinks it's poorly defined as well. If Patrick, you might actually be watching this, so please correct me in the comments. But I seem to remember we were talking about the way that the role's defined is not great. And still employees think it's to do with environments management. Yes, that's the problem. And so the problem is it's like how do we educate people? Well, you can't, right? So you have to just understand what they're looking for, and that comes at the interview stage, right? So you need to tease out what they're actually looking for. My only major piece of advice for you on this is do not take a DevOps role if it's advertised as a support role. Right? Because DevOps, the whole point of it is development operations. If it's advertised as a support role, they're almost saying, as a DevOps engineer, you want to be creative, you want to understand the full pipelines. I've seen many DevOps roles being advertised as a support role. That's very, very dangerous. So this is something I kind of just want to show you. So I'll jump onto it here. Kata Coda. This is something which I think is really so again, for those who are not super great at coding or just getting into coding, or those who are really good at coding, this is going to be great for you. So this website Katacoda is a place where you don't even need to sign up, right? You can just essentially open Katacoda/learn and start working hands-on. Right, so I could click on this. So it's 34 scenarios. Let's go to run. So hopefully this will give me an example. So there we go. Right, so it's going to spin up. I got confused and now do anything interesting. Yeah, I agree with that, Milland. Alan, I'll get your comment in a minute. I'm just going to show this. So essentially, this is somewhere where what it's done is it's immediately spun up a development environment that you can play with, and you can just actually work through it, and it's going to tell you the commands that you can do. I think you can actually click them and it'll run it for you. So yeah, and so this is like, look, I literally, it's like two clicks, right? It's like a URL and 2 clicks, and you're straight into hands-on. So you automatically skip all of the theoretical bullshit, which a lot of again, I think hoarding educators try to push out when they don't really have a lot of content. Yeah. So here you can just work through and work straight into the content. So you don't just have obviously Docker, right? You've got everything. You've got let me jump back. You've got Kubernetes, machine learning, application orchestration, networking. I suck at networking. Serverless, that's really sexy at the moment. TensorFlow, and so you can make your own as well, right? So this is a resource which you could use and have no experience and get yourself into a pole position. But equally, if you're really experienced, this is a really great way for you to hone and improve your existing knowledge. So I'm going to look at the questions that I've got. Before I move on to AGILE, which I think I'll finish up with AGILE, possibly, depending. John, go on that, yeah. Okay. What do you think is the most responsible for the mislabeling of the DevOps role? Me. No, employers who do know what they want, or engineers overselling themselves. That's brilliant, Alan. That's I should really introduce Alan as he's quite a technically competent engineer. Actually, very technically competent. He's taught me a lot, and Alan, I love you, but you can be cynical, but you are spot on, 100%. It is true. So. This is the problem where I kind of went to earlier, right? So it's not just employers asking for the world. It's engineers who label themselves as DevOps engineers, and they have no right to do so. One of the best examples one of my previous bosses showed me, which was quite funny, was in 2009, LinkedIn started to get people on creating profiles saying, I have 10 years of DevOps experience, but DevOps was only invented in 2008. And so you'll actually still see that, right? So you might see, like, obviously it's harder now, it's 12 years since it's been invented, but I still remember in 2015, and you were seeing stuff like that, and you're like, these people they're ruining the trade because they're marketing themselves as hot shots, and then they're confusing the organization as what a DevOps engineer actually is. So it kind of goes back to the point of just being honest and just market yourself properly. So this is one's quite controversial. So I'll go through this. For me, this is like really core, right? So this is like, if you've not listened to anything that I've said so far, this is, in my opinion, is the most fundamental skills that you need to learn. I think we had some questions on project management earlier. We had some questions on Agile, moving into cyber. I had some good ones from Mitchell. And so a lot of these are tied into this, right? Because like ultimately now, I'm just trying to articulate this in a good way for you. So like now you're not just expected to deliver, you're expected to deliver in line with certain consistent approaches. So before there's what was called extreme programming, waterfall, there were alternate methodologies that were used for companies, large organizations and small, to deliver products. Now most of them have died because the environment has exploded with talent, right? As more and more people use computing and computers, more and more people apply for roles as an engineer. And so what that then means is the split between business and tech changes. So as tech expands, business contracts, obviously, because you can only employ the same amount of people. And the requirement for doing your job properly has never been more important. And almost every organization that I've worked in has the demand and need for the agile expertise in some sense, right? Even if they don't name it as agile. And so I'm not going to go through all of these, but again, you can read. But if anything, if you're not tech savvy, or if you feel that you're running behind, you can compensate for that by being a strong agile leader, right? So whether that's being a Scrum Master or a product owner or just a general Scrum member, your ability to manage stand-ups, to manage Jira, Confluence, the Scrum ceremonies, to understand. So Agile is essentially your window into connecting with the wider world, right? It's a methodology for productivity that is widely accepted. So I can't stress how important it is to learn Agile. So I'm not, I think tech expectations are higher in China because competition is so intense. Yes, actually that's a good point. Okay, so in China that's true. So in China, depending on the role that you apply for, I do agree with you, Qingnan, but I'd also say it depends on the company, right? So for example, in Shenzhen, the expectations for there are more there are more international companies in China, or internationally thinking companies in China, which recognize different talent. But when it comes to things such as application of machine learning, DevOps, yes, the requirement for technologies is much higher. That's true. That's definitely true. It's harder to get into Google Beijing than anywhere in the USA. Yeah, I think yeah. So like I say, it does depend on the company. Google is definitely a use case but it's hard to get into Google anywhere, to be honest. It's changing, but it's very, very hard. One from Mitchell: could you speak more about the different approaches or expectations of tech in different parts of the world? Okay, we're kind of on that topic as well. Alan's saying, thank you, he's actually better at networking than he thinks. Thanks, Alan. I'm going to try and cover this. So essentially, developing countries, China, Europe, funding, research. But yeah, okay, so, wait, right. So the disparity between different countries and tech requirements. Starting from West to East. West, you need to be more of a culture fit for certain large organizations, and there's more flexibility on your ability to learn. There's more flexibility on your ability to be in work. In the further east you go, the higher the demand for overtime. So let me rephrase that. The further east you go, and south. So I'll include east and south as you go down Africa until you get to South Africa. So, if I talk from like Morocco, if I think of, I know where, like, think of Morocco as as north and south, and as you go through, and then you pass through Nigeria and things. And so generally speaking, the further east or south you go, the expectation for overtime is higher, right? So in the West, you'd be like, are you doing overtime this week, or we need people to do overtime? Yes, no, I'll get paid. But the further east you go, like, I'll give Poland as an example of a middle ground. In Poland, some companies you just do overtime. You don't have a choice. You just do it. In other companies, you get paid for it. Some companies don't. The further east you go, when I was working in China, I didn't get paid for overtime. Sometimes I did if I complained. Most of the times I didn't. There's also a different culture which is really important. So, for Milland, I think Mitchell might be interested in this as well. And Mitchell's saying, indeed, this is so yeah. I'll come back. So essentially, like, one of I'm trying to think of this in terms of like the effort that you put into the role. In India and China particularly, you might be expected to come for a meeting on a Saturday or a Sunday, and that's the way it is, right? So it's not like in the UK you might have a pub night out, and sure, you have pub nights out. You have the nights out in India and China, but in India and China, there's your attitude towards work is more the same as your attitude towards life, and there's less of a distinction between life and work in Asia generally, and I'm seeing that more and more in Africa now. So as I work with Kenyans and Nigerians and people from Ghana, I don't know, is it Ghanaians, on open source projects, I see they're working at the weekend, right? They're sometimes a bit more relaxed, but they're generally working at the weekends and they're working in the evenings. Same in China, same in India. Now, that's not to say people in the West don't work overtime. It's just the expectation for overtime is much higher in developing nations because obviously revenue constraints, right? But then obviously there's more forgiveness as well. Like, I need to be fair and balanced here. There's more forgiveness for cultural mistakes in the East and the South. And you might say, well, that doesn't sound right. How can that be true? I thought I thought the West was more more mature. That's not actually true. I'll give you an example. In Japan and in China, a lot of their tech culture is built upon existing previously highly successful work cultures. What you might not be aware of is this AGILE that I'm talking about here has its roots from Japan, right? So Kanban, right, in both Japanese and Chinese means Kanban means look at the board, right? Engineers in factories in China and Japan, as they grew, right, as they became really strong, a lot of these engineers who worked on production lines would need to know where they are today. Like, am I fitting the wheels, or am I doing the engine, or am I doing the windows? And they would have a board on top of like a really big wall, and they'd look for their name, and it'd be like, oh, I'm Shaolin, you're here today. And the term Kanban came from, I think, Toyota or Mitsubishi, and independently in China as well. And so they've had like technical and engineering, you could say different engineering concepts, which actually grew into Agile. So if anything, we're actually slightly behind. And to the point of culture as well, in India, in Japan, and in China, because they are bigger places, right? They have more disparity between regions. There's a lot more mixture of people with different mindsets. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it's just the way it is. And so there's more focus on integrating people that have different approaches, but it's generally a unifying approach, right? So it's generally, in the West, it's more flexible. Like we facilitate for mothers, we facilitate for I forget what you call it, parental leave if you're a father. I think it's like paternity leave and maternity leave. That's not as developed in Asia and the South, in Africa, But what is developed is more of a unifying funnel where people fit into. So I hope that kind of answers the question. Milan says it's actually Toyota that did the Kanban. Thank you, Milan. You're right. He says India is the same, no overtime, 100%. And yeah, so I'm getting a bit of validation here. So thank you, everyone. And so, okay. So what do we see? Okay, we see there's slightly two different approaches, but we see a universal model, right? So we see this idea of agile persisting everywhere, right? And sure, it might look slightly different, but if you're in the West or if you're working for an international organization, you need to learn these ceremonies, right? And the reason that you need to learn these ceremonies is because they actually make you a better professional, right? They make you a better coder. They teach you to release in increments. There's a lot of theory behind this, which you should pick up on. Things such as delivering in fixed quantities, right? So that by you committing to time and scope, and say you're committing to time and cost, but you're saying the scope and quality of what I build might vary. We'll agree upon a minimum viable product. What you're doing is you're satisfying the business, and you're generating efficiency. And so there's only 3 members of a Scrum team, so SMTM and PO. So I think it's Scrum member, product owner, and TM. No, Scrum master, team member, and product owner. Yeah. So study this, learn this. If you're not great at tech, or if you're really good at tech and you want to know what's lacking, you can do well in an organization just by having the core professional competencies in Scrum. And then obviously the more as agile as you move into coding, the more you'll find yourself moving into dev and DevOps. DevOps generally champion agile, which is why I got good at agile. So I'm looking at the questions. I'm going to finish up because we're kind of on the 2-hour mark, but I want to just finish up with something a little bit, maybe a little negative, and then I'll finish up with something positive. So there are bad people in the world, right? And so where to start with this guy? So this is a guy called Siraj Naval. I'm interested in Milan. Do you know who this guy is? He's or Mitchell. Do you know who this guy is as well? This guy, for anybody that's even slightly interested in AI, they know this guy, and he was my hero. So when I first got into coding period, I copied and I emulated this guy, right? So he'd produce work, I'd take his work, change it, understand it, ask him questions. He was brilliant, and he was producing high quality products every single, like twice a week. He's producing, he'd come out and he'd say things like, oh, here's my stock trading algorithm, or I've created an insurance AI bot. And people were looking at this like, how is this guy producing so much strong content? And it turns out that he was plagiarizing everything. And so, they have a saying in development, which is, good engineers simulate, the best engineers copy. But that's different. What they mean by that is a strong developer won't build something from scratch. They'll work on a well-known template. So they'll work on something like, an abstract object, or they'll work on a already defined class and copy that style, something like that, right? A DevOps engineer might work on, existing scripts, right? And so you don't reinvent the wheel. But what Siraj did was he literally just took people's work and said it was his own, right? He literally went out there and he plagiarized everything from, the most advanced products in machine learning to academic papers. So he published, I believe he published in Nature. He was plagiarizing articles like cutting edge biology articles, machine learning articles, and then he changed a few words and said, that's mine. And he gained millions of followers. He essentially he rivaled Andrew Ng at some point, right? So the big hitters in machine learning, like Stuart Russell, Andrew Ng, Siraj Raval was there on the same level. And I can imagine the frustration of Andrew Ng. It's like, I've spent 30 years of my life on this, and this guy has done a YouTube video for 3 years or 4 years, and all of a sudden he's the hottest thing in tech. But very quickly what happened was people slowly called him out. But he was very good. Like I spotted it early as well, right? Because I would take some of his stuff and try and reproduce it on my own computer. And every time I tried to do it, it wouldn't work, right? There'd be something like an environment variable being missed, or there'd be something like reference to data files, which he wouldn't have. And I'd send him a message and say like, oh, Siraj, amazing video, but this doesn't work, or I don't have the data, or you said it works on Ubuntu, it doesn't work on Ubuntu. And he would deliberately delete those comments, right? And so he would, it's sneaky, right? But he succeeded. And so he went out there and he wasn't just like fooling himself. He was actively preventing people from finding him out. And so the point is, question. Guru of everything, master of none. Yeah, spot on. Mitchell says, yes, I think Mitchell knows him. 你好作者我又回来了 你好 and so this guy, he's not the only one, right? He's clearly not the only one. There's lots of people out there, and the problem is people like that are a threat to people like you, because you're only going to do well if you open source your code, right? So again, this is for people both starting their career in developing nations and people who are project managers or trying to do job transition. You need to build your brand, and the only way you can build your brand is to get your stuff out there. But when you get your stuff out there, you have a chance of it being seized upon, right? And you need to be like conscientious of that, right? It doesn't matter if you're in China or America, South America. Part of the coding culture of today and tomorrow is more and more focused on being like honest, open, being like humble. Even though that kind of sounds cheesy, if you're not, you could be deplatformed, and that could be the end of your career. In Siraj's case, he got lucky. Okay, I'm going to do a summary. I'm just going to keep an eye on the comments and make sure I'm covering everything. I do hope this was useful. Can I get like some comments to say if you thought this was good or bad? I kind of found myself going into small tangents. It was kind of hard using this streaming software. So let's kind of just give you the summary things which I kind of think are takeaways, right? So first thing is it's a very naive mentality, and I'm gonna make this advice specifically to everyone, China as well, India as well, Europe and America, right? The traditional mentality, especially in East, is that you work in a company, you work hard, and you move up through the organization. But if you look at any company, from Google to Tencent to FinTech, the average lifespan of an employee is low compared to in the past. So what I mean by that is, in the past, people would change their bank accounts less than they would get a divorce. People would change their jobs less than they would change a house. And now that's completely turned upside down. Another good example is the average lifespan of a Google employee. So the average lifespan of a Google employee, I can't remember the number, it's 2 years or something, right? And the reason why it's so low is because these people, when they get to Google, right, so they've worked their whole life and they finally got a job at Google and they're like, I've made it. What happens is they have the validation that they have personally, and they end up becoming bored very quickly, and they feel like there's nowhere else for them to go. And a very high percentage of Google employees end up becoming CEOs, because when they become a CEO, they'll say things like, when I worked at Google, if you don't believe me, check the numbers out there. It is the case that the average lifespan or the average loyalty of an employee is reducing. In the same way, the average loyalty of a company to their employees is reducing. So my advice is, in some companies, yes, you can focus on climbing the career ladder, but the environments globally is changing, and that doesn't seem to be the optimal path. The optimal path to progression in your career seems to be something like this. You work at a place for 2 years, and then you zigzag to a higher role in another company or internally, and you grow by applying for the next step roll up outside of your vine. Now, I'm probably going to get a lot of slack for this, because a lot of people saying, Oh, thanks, Darren. Thanks, Suresh. That's brilliant. Thanks, Mitchell. Thanks, Alan. Great. And so the point I want to get across here is it's very controversial for me to say something like that, especially given my background. And I'm not saying this on behalf of any company. This is my own personal experience. I personally have progressed, but by every time I've reached a barrier, that, like, okay, I'm going to try and take a risk here. This resonates a little bit with the current Black Lives Matter discrimination, right? And just general discrimination in the workplace. And I'm talking globally as well, right? So I've seen discrimination all over the world. There's discrimination based on your personality, as I mentioned earlier, right? So this isn't me picking out any company, it's just a fact. People who have a good personality generally move up the chain. Shock horror, is anybody actually surprised to hear that? No, I don't think you are. But what that means is sometimes you reach an insurmountable barrier. What I find in tech organizations is people leave their job once they have given 2 years of hard work, or a year or 3 years of hard work, and they've applied for a promotion and been rejected. I find that all the time, right? So I find what happens is, it's happened to me personally, but I can't call out the companies. But I've personally been in a situation where I've worked really hard and I've made myself sick, right? And I've literally, my friends can count for this, and my family, I've made myself sick by working really, really hard, to the point where I was just chasing that promotion. I was just chasing that acknowledgement. I wasn't even chasing a promotion. I was chasing a higher rating within the organization. And in the organization, they have this thing called a bell curve. If you don't know what a bell curve is, I'll show you what a bell curve is. Bell curve is something like this, right? So let's say you have 5 employees. So 0 and 5. So my writing's rubbish, right? So let's say you have 5 employees and you're the manager. You can promote one employee, like most people fit here. You can employ one employee who fits on the outside, and you can fire, or you can demote, or you can, restrict one employee on the other side. So this is a bad, hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully you can see this. But on one side of the spectrum, you have badly performing employees. On the other side of the spectrum, you have high performance employees. And at the top, you have you, me, and everyone else. Now, for organizations, this is what's known as the bell curve. I give you, as a manager, X amount of money and resources. You can promote 1 or 2 people, but you also have to ensure that, if you promote more people than you have a budget for, you have to account for that some way. So let's say, let's say most people fit here. Most people are normal. But that's not true. That's not the way things work, right? Sometimes you have 3 people who are really good. Sometimes you have 3 people who are really high performers, and you should promote all 3. That doesn't happen, right? I'm sorry, but in the real world, it doesn't happen. And if you have found that you've been disadvantaged, it's highly likely that you'll continue to be disadvantaged. I'm not trying to preach here. Thanks, Qingnan, the Gaussian distribution, which it's not normal distribution, Gaussian distribution. It is Gaussian, yeah, you're right. And so most people fit in the middle. But in reality, a lot of people work really hard. And no matter how hard they work, they will never move out into the outside where they get a promotion. And that's because the promotion is so sought after. It's so valuable that people will do anything to get that, and people will generate friendships, people will generate relationships. You'll find in a lot of corrupt organizations, people that go higher generally seem to be people that are a lad's lad, or a girl's girl, or somebody who talks very well, or somebody who's very articulate. They might not be the best employee. And so this is why I realize this is highly controversial, but this is why people choose to apply to other roles. So people who have been really successful are those who have recognized that they can't go any further. And so what happened in my case, and two times, was I worked really, really hard. And in one case, I was heavily relied upon. And so I handed in my resignation, and I was told, "What? Why are you handing in your resignation?" And I said, "Well, I worked really hard, and you keep judging me in the middle, and I know I'm working harder than other people because I'm putting in more hours. So, I asked for critical feedback, and you gave me no critical feedback. So what am I to take from this?" Now that resulted in a bit of a firestorm on my part. But I left in good terms, and so I should say this has happened to me twice. But very quickly I learned that loyalty is not always earned, and sometimes you kind of need to know when to cut your losses, and it's hard. It's a hard thing to deal with, and a lot of people who have not done well in their career, and I don't want to criticize you, but it's possibly because you haven't recognized that earlier. A lot of people have thought, if I just work that bit harder, I'll get recognition. But sometimes the system is actively against you, and it might be your personality. And why do I say that? It's because a lot of people in tech, generally, like if you're a coder, you're not known for being Mr. Personality or Mrs. Personality. So it is the way it is. It's what happens when you work in a very complex environment, and I hope that will change. Some companies are working on changing it. I know some companies that I've worked with are working to address that. But for you need to consider, like, how much loss are you making by staying in your current role, if you feel that you've hit the wall. Obvious things here before I kind of wrap up. Big companies like documentation, obviously. So even though big companies claim that they don't, so large organizations, IBM, Intel. I'm going to mention the ones I haven't worked for, so I can just know. Spotify. No, not Spotify. Actually, they're the opposite. So we'll say a few big companies. They say we want to be more agile. We want less. We want you to deliver more, produce less documentation. But actually, because the distribution of skills in the organization, the majority of people are not skilled. There's a statistic which shows, again, I'm making this up on the spot because I can't quite remember the numbers, but something like 2 out of 10 people do, something like 20% of the workforce do 80% of the work, something like that. Now, you've probably seen it yourself, right? There are some people that work really, really, really hard, and there's a lot of people that kind of just, maybe they're in superfluous roles. What that means is that those people who are in superfluous roles or are in less hands-on roles, they demand documentation. So even though your agile model says you shouldn't have documentation, they'll still demand you. They'll say, you've provided no evidence of this, because they think that they're adding value, and sometimes they are. Small organizations claim that they want more documentation, but obviously it's the complete opposite, right? Because small organizations are financially bound, and so if you spend a long time building a skills matrix, right? So for example, you build a matrix and say, I want to upskill the whole team. If you spend a long time building that, you might get in trouble, because they might say, what the fuck were you doing? Like, you're supposed to be delivering products, and you've spent a week producing an upskilling model. So you have to be very careful. I'm conscious of these comments. I'm glad that Mitchell's saying brutal reality, this is good stuff. Again, that's why I'm doing this, right? So the movement has prompted me to kind of put all my cards on the table and try and help everybody I can to get up, because it was pass it on. There's a superpower that you kind of need to have, or it's what's called a super mediocre power, I think it's called, or like an average superpower, which is the ability to say no and not feel bad about it. What do I mean by that? You're going to get into tech, right? So if you've followed my advice, you're going to try and do code bounties, open source projects. You're going to try and contribute and collaborate. But very quickly, once you build a name for yourself, people are going to be asking for your time. They're going to be asking you to help them do stuff. They'll be assuming your time. As you get more and more powerful, they'll be doing bad things, which happens to professionals, where they actually use your company's name for their benefit without your advice, and it can cause a lot of trouble. Now, this is me talking generically, not personally, but you have to be aware of how you manage your brand. And what that also means is, there's a counter to this, yeah? So there's this idea that as you gain your network, right? So your mission, right? Your mission, if you're here to get into tech, one of your missions is you need to expand your network. But as you expand your network, what happens is like mediocrity or like noise fills into your network and detracts you from value, right? And so you might not be self-confident. You might be feeling like behind, and so you feel necessary to go on LinkedIn and just add everyone, and you feel necessary to overcompensate. Now, I'm not against that, but the problem that will give you is that it's much better to have one useful connection than 10 shit connections, right? And those 10 shit connections can be brutal, right? Because I'm not just talking about 10 shit connections who don't interact with you. I'm not just talking about like, I'm trying to promote my technical brand. So I'm getting myself out there on GitHub, Kaggle, LinkedIn, Twitter, but stuff that I'm sharing, people aren't liking it and people aren't responding. And you think, well, okay, there is one element to that. You have a bad network, but you have a noisy network. But you also have people who will try to, you could probably see the battery's low message, so I'll keep it 5 minutes. But you'll also have people who try to capitalize on your time. So I'm going to quickly just finish off with some quick skills, summary advice, and then I'll wrap up some more later. I'll check my battery percentage. So at 5%, so I should be able to manage it. Get into open source, get active in the tech community. If you want to try and make money, think about personal projects, contracting, Fiverr, bug bounty, Kaggle, educational content. Market your educational content properly, build your brand, but only another problem on LinkedIn. Only start promoting your brand properly once you have stuff to share. You'll find again noise on the internet where people are constantly sharing and promoting nothing. Right? They'll have meaningless captions like, those who work harder gain quicker, and they'll share a picture and they're not actually adding value, right? That is absolutely rife on LinkedIn right now. And so don't do that. Yeah, only add value. My friend, I can't recommend enough, Emmanuel. He's amazing. Every time he makes a post, he says, "This is what I did. It's awesome. Here's how I did it. Here's where you can get the resources to do what I did." Be like him. He's brilliant. Companies have drastically different social values. Be aware of that. I covered that earlier. University degrees is not a badge of competence. So if you're a lot of university students watching this, when employers go to take you on, they're not taking you for your degree. They're giving you a chance because of your degree. Your degree shows you have the ability to learn, not that you're competent. Yeah. So be aware of that. It shows that you can learn. They want learners, not competent. No, they want learners and competence. Viewers' questions. I did cover all of these. I think, I definitely covered all of these. Open web apps. I've got a link here for you, Milland. I'm conscious of my power. So there's a link there for open web apps, but just consider things like adaptive versus reactive design, modularity. Think of things like microservices, mobile first. Mobile first is generally a good pattern to follow. Think about things like the 12-factor app. This is what I'll finish off on. 12 quick wins, and so see if my battery cuts out before I go through them all. So if you're in support or if you work with support people, try to give the people who are on the front line, who are using chat windows, rather than alert to say restart the server, give them the button that they can push to restart the server and shorten that human feedback cycle. Evil user stories. This is a beautiful one. So consider, when you're doing agile or story planning or mission planning, like on a Friday for fun, just be like, how could we hack, or how could we break our product? How could we make it less resilient? How could we ruin this? Then write a story. It takes you 15 minutes, right? And then from that, you've generated additional technical debt to be resolved. You've highlighted a problem. Make your pipeline smart. So there's lots of stuff on Kubernetes, Kubeflow and SageMaker out of the box AI. So you might want to build that into monitoring and make your monitoring intelligent and make your manifest file. So if you're a DevOps person, if you want to see what's the future of DevOps, make your configuration as code, generalize that with an algorithm. Governance as code, so start thinking about orchestration, not Jenkins, but start thinking about how you orchestrate end-to-end humans and automated processes, because that's coming back into fashion. Code amnesty, so this is for people who are, again, either new or really old, like me. Consider a day in the workplace. If you're a leader, or if you're not a leader, just then suggest this. Consider a day where everybody just tells the truth and just say, I broke that, or that's going to fail in production. Make it anonymous, so if you want, so nobody gets blamed, and then at least the business will have a path to resolve the problem, and it won't cause, and it might even gain you good props. Here's some cool tools for school. It's more for cyber, so I'm going to leave it at that. I don't have time for this, so I'm going to end it there. I do thank you everyone for watching this. I kind of apologise that it took me maybe 10-15 minutes to get up to speed. It's just I'm using this streaming material, so I guess if I show you, I'm using this thing called Streamlabs. I better not show you too much because it'll make you confused, but I'll switch to the outro. So yeah, thank you everyone for watching this. I'll air this after and take any questions. I might need to edit in case there's anything that potentially could get myself or yourself in trouble, but I generally don't think. I think most of it's been good content. Thank you, Mitchell, for hanging on. Thank you, Millen, for hanging on. Thank you, Alan, for hanging on. I really do appreciate it. Thanks, Darren, Suresh. Thank you, Chingnan. Brilliant comments. Who else? Yeah, thank you. I think we've got lots of comments, but essentially, thank you, everyone. Streamception. Yeah, it's about Streamception. I will try to add notes. I'll make sure that I add like a full robust list of all the tools that I've pointed you towards. And I might do a more shorter video where I kind of crystallize it all into, say, 10 or 15 minutes. Again, you've been brilliant. I do appreciate it. I'm going to end the stream now, and any questions or anything that you maybe didn't quite get, just drop me a message or reply to the thread, and I'll make sure I answer them. Again, thank you all. It's been really good, and hopefully we can do another one at some point.